as well for that as well. So we've been looking at the parables that Jesus spoke, and we've started going through looking at individual parables and what it means, not just to the people listening, but also to the people here today, and what the words are. So I want to give a brief recap before I share about this, what parables are. So parables are an earthly story with a spiritual truth. So it's an earthly story with a spiritual truth, and it was a very, very common way of teaching and sharing in the days of Jesus during those times. They all did that. They all shared. And if you remember, we have modern day versions of these parables as well. So during when I preached a couple of weeks ago, I played a video of Jay Johns, who was sharing a story about a man with donuts, and he was sitting down at a airport, and he believed that the man sitting across him was stealing his donuts as he was eating and having his coffee, and he was getting more and more and more upset at this guy who was stealing his donuts. When just as he was about to leave, he looked down and saw his donuts sitting on the seat. And what he'd been doing was stealing the other guy's donuts. And from that, he started talking about tithing and that everything is God's and God's sharing his donuts with us. And that's how Jesus spoke and shared with parables. He used everyday things that people would readily recognize, and they would draw them in, and they would be hanging on to every word because they could identify with the people in the story. So we must remember, when we're looking at all these parables, we've got to think about, okay, who is listening to this? What is the message that's coming across? So that was the structure of what parables were. Parables had a fictional story, and it had an impact statement right at the end. And that impact statement was for the people listening then, as well as us now. So the message through all the ages. Robert Warburg said this. He said, the parable's purpose was to reveal just enough truth to raise intense curiosity, promising more if listeners went along, but also concealing enough of the truth that the complacent could walk away uninspired. And that happened a lot. So I looked up the word prodigal. And according to the dictionary, it's spending money or using resources freely and recklessly, wastefully extravagant. So as we all know, the story of the prodigal son is a story of a son who was recklessly wasteful. Having convinced his father to give him his inheritance early, he squandered all on fast living before coming home. Now that's the thing around the story. Now this is where we need to know who the listeners are and why it had such a big impact. Okay, because the son asking the father was a massive deal. It's not like my son coming to me and saying, look, I need to move out. Can you help me, set me up and do what you've got to do to get me going? I've had to do that a couple of times, and that wasn't a big deal for me, but a massive deal for those who were listening. Because for a son to ask the father for his inheritance early can only mean one thing. It's actually expressing a death wish on the father. Author Ken Bailey, who lived in the region of the world for quite some time, wrote this. He said, for over 15 years, I've been asking people of all walks of life, from Morocco to India and from Turkey to the Sudan, about the implications of the son's request for his inheritance while the father is still living. The answer has almost always been emphatically the same. So the conversation will run as follows. Has anyone ever made such a request in your village? Never. Could anyone ever make such a request? Impossible. If anyone did, what would happen? His father would beat him, of course. Why? Because the request means he wants his father to die. So you can imagine the impact, the son asking the father and the people listening going, wow. So to everybody's amazement who's hearing this story from Jesus, the father does. He divides what he has between his two sons. Imagine the father, the pain the father is going through at the moment. Imagine how he's feeling. Most of us think the son took off straight away as soon as he did this. But he actually would have had to spend a little bit of time in the village first, because what his father would have given him would have been like the herds, property, slaves, stuff like that. And he would have had to have liquidated all this before he could go away, because he only went with cash and money. And so he would have been selling off livestock to other villages and people around to fund what he wants to do. Now, all the villagers, people in the villages, would have known also how he got this stock and this livestock. So there would have been anger towards him, not just in his family, but in the villages and the surrounding areas. Everybody would have known how this all happened. So he went off, wasted the money, realised he did wrong, and then came back. What I want to look at is two things. What the father does, and then also what the sons do afterwards. So the father does 5 things that would have been considered outrageous for those in the Middle East at the time. And when Jesus is sharing this, the people listening were going, that's amazing. I can't believe that. What he would have done was he did 5 things. First of all, he runs out to greet him. And this is something that anybody of any standing, a male, does not do in that time. They do not lift up their garbs and show their legs and run and do things like that. That's actually a humiliating thing for them to do. But the father does that. It's an outrageous thing, but he humiliates himself, but he doesn't care, because he sees his son and he runs out to greet him. The second thing the father does, he kisses him. The Greek word here to describe this is kataphalo, which usually means to kiss again and again and again. So in other words, it's not a quick peck on the cheek, welcome back, son. It's a genuine, emotional outpouring of love. You're back. So again and again. And don't forget, this is from the father who was betrayed, rejected, whose son wished he was dead. The third thing the father does is call for the best robe to be put on the son. So question, who owns the best robe in the family, normally? And unless your name is Joseph, as coats of many colours, it will be the father. So he's obviously called for his own robe, the best robe, to be put around the son. And he gets the ring and the sandals on his feet. So in other words, he doesn't allow the son to have the status or look as someone who is a servant. He outwardly clothes him so that people will know straight away that he is my son. And the last thing the father did was bring the fatted calf and kill it. That's what he asked to happen. He didn't ask for the fatted chook, because that would have done 3 guys. Big chook, that would have been enough. No, he asked for the fatted calf. Why? Because he wanted to invite the villagers. He wanted to invite everybody around. Those who knew the youngest son, those who would have held something against the youngest son for doing what he did, He wanted everybody to come and share in the feast so that everybody will see and know that my son is home and is alive. And that is a wonderful picture of restoration, isn't it? Of a father who, besides the fact that he'd been betrayed and rejected, didn't worry about that, wiped it clean. My son is home, and we need to celebrate this. That, for those people listening to the story, they would never have anticipated that. They were expecting the son to come home, the father go, I told you so, and then cop a bit of a beating or something like that as punishment. They did not or would not have expected that outpouring, that showing of love. You see what Jesus is doing in this story? He's communicating to every person who ever wanted to take a step towards God how significant we are to him, how God feels about us. He doesn't just wait for us. The moment we turn back to Jesus, he runs to us with open arms, says, welcome back, my son. He kills the fatted calf and the whole of heaven celebrates. And that is a massive thing. That's like, wow. And if that's all we get from the story, that's great. But the story is actually not finished. And this is where it gets interesting. There are two mentions of the older son in the story. One was when the property was divided between the two. And the other was when the son comes back from the field hearing the music and wondering what is happening, and he gets angry because of what the father has done, the way he's welcomed back the youngest son. And so he refuses to join the party. Now that in itself would have been a severe insult to his father, and that would humiliate him for a second time around. If you read further, you find that the oldest son has distanced himself from the father. He's not close to his father. It's a broken relationship between the oldest son and the father. Why have you never, killed a fatted calf for me, for what I've done? I've slaved for you for years. No thanks. That is not a son in a joyful relationship. This is a broken relationship between the two. So that is the picture that Jesus is giving. But Jesus, how he uses parables and how he tells stories, he's a master storyteller. And he uses the ways that they spoke then to share the stories. So Jesus structured the story like a lot of people did during that time. And it's called a chiasm, or a ring story. And it's usually expressed through a series of letters, each letter representing a new idea. So for example, the structure A, B, B, A, so it starts and finishes at the same sort of point. So an example would be when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. So you can see there A going, B tough, tough get going. Can you understand that? Another one when the Sabbath was made for man and the man for Sabbath. So once again, you've got a very simple structure, starts and finishes at the same way. So if you look at the story, it's a little bit more complex. Look at the story of Noah. And Noah, as you can see, starts with the sons, life on earth, cursed, the flood, ark, and so on, builds to the point, the crunch point where God remembers Noah out on the ark, and then it fills in the gaps, heading back to Noah and the sons. So that's how the structure of stories went a lot of those times. And people were used to that. They knew that. So whenever the story started, they were expecting it to finish in a certain way. So when Jesus talks about the younger son, the first half of the story, The son is lost, goods wasted, everything is lost. The great sin, which is what it was for feeding pigs for the Gentiles, total rejection, and then change of mind, then repentance, acceptance. Son is found. So as you can see, there's a start and a finish to the story. There's a symmetry about it. It goes around in a circle. So let's look at how Jesus structured the story within the parable of the older son. The son is far off, comes in, your brother's safe. Father comes to reconcile with the son because the son is angry. The son's going, how you treated me. In other words, there's that broken relationship. So the father tries to mend that broken relationship and how you treated him. He tries to reconcile it and says, your brother's safe. That's why we're having the feast. But that's where the story stops. It doesn't complete. And so everybody listening would have been going, hang on, what's happened about the older son? Did he or did he not reconcile with the father? Did he or did he not reconcile with the younger brother? Because you can imagine the older son would have had a lot of issues to deal with. If you read between the lines, he would have been just as angry with the father for initially giving the inheritance over to the younger son. He would have said, what were you thinking? What were you doing? He wants you dead. Why did you allow this to happen? What sort of father are you? And then when the son returned, why have you treated him like this? He deserves a beating. He deserves a thrashing, not a celebration. Here I am doing everything for you, and yet you give me nothing. So the people listening were going, what happened? What happens? And the Pharisees and the religious leaders who were listening to that story picked up on it. They knew actually that the older son was them in how Jesus was speaking. They knew that Jesus' message was very pointed towards them. But they were also going, hang on, how do you finish this? And I want to suggest to you today that I think there are times like we are the older son. There will be those who identify with the younger son, the prodigal son, who rebelled, ran away, was broken but returned, expecting shame, instead experiencing the undeserved love of God. And that's a wonderful picture of grace. But there are those who have been a Christian for a long time, who've been in faith for a long time, who have worked hard, who faithfully served in the church, attended all the events, who do whatever is asked, who may not have a relationship with their Heavenly Father like they used to have. They may not have the joy. That relationship may be broken. They might be outwardly doing what is required, but inwardly tired and complaining, not experiencing joy, getting upset when anything small goes wrong. So I think there are times when we're like that older son. In Revelation chapter 2, the letter to the church in Ephesus, it says this, I write this to the Ephesus, to the angel of the church, one with 7 stars in his right fist grip, striding through the golden 7 lights circle speaks. I see what you've done, your hard work, your refusal to quit. I know you can't stomach evil, that you weed out apostolic pretenders. I know your persistence, your courage in my cause, that you never wear out. But you've walked away from your first love. Why? What's going on with you anyway? Do you have any idea how far you've fallen? A Lucifer fall. Turn back. Recover your dear early love. No time to waste, for I'm well on my way to removing your light from the golden circle. Just like the older son. I see what you've done. This is the Father saying to the Son, also saying to us. I see what you've done, your hard work, your refusal to quit. I know you can't stomach evil, that you weed out apostolic pretenders. I know your persistence, your courage in my cause, that you never wear out. But you walked away from your first love. Is this how we feel sometimes? I know I go through times when it feels so dry. It feels so broken in some respects. Like when I'm praying to almost a nothingness. I know that's not the case, but that's sometimes how I feel. Doing so many things, seeing people, doing, ministry, running a church. Sometimes the joy's not there. Sometimes I'm like that older brother. That relationship with the Father is broken. But here's a great thing. Just as Jesus told in the parable, that story, the story is not finished. So we get to write our own ending. We get to choose what we do. We get to choose whether or not we're going to stay in that way, or whether or not we're going to turn back to the Father and once again experience the joy that goes with that. We can change things, but we've got to be prepared to do whatever it takes. The younger son showed that. He was prepared to do whatever it took to come back into a relationship with the Father. And we need to do the same as well. That is the challenge to the Pharisees, and that's a challenge to us. Some people may be trying to be good people by doing godly things, reading their Bible, praying and serving those in need. But if you're doing it out of a sense of religious duty and obligation, we're doing it not in the right attitude. Where's the love in that? Faith is not a business transaction. Faith is not us doing something so that we get something in return. Faith only works if there's love. It's time to stop trying to please God and let's simply just love Him. Stop doing things out of obligation. Only do the things that enhance our relationship with Him. The things that please you because they delight Him. Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey what I command. For some, it means if you love me, you'll obey me and prove how much you love me. But what I think he's actually saying is, when we love Him, our obedience to Him will flow out of that relationship. Very, very different. Sometimes we find it hard to grasp the enormous extravagance of our Father's love and the lengths to which He is willing to go to show His love. That's why Paul reminded us in Ephesians. And He prayed that we might know and understand it more and more. And that is my prayer for you today. Father, if we understand this story right, it's a description of the unbelievable way that you love us and your open arm desire to restore broken relationships any way that you can, no holding back. Lord, we know that our story is not finished yet, and I ask that you help us to finish it the right way with you in a complete, healthy, restored relationship with you. I ask this in your name. Amen.